Hello, everyone. My name is Henny Fisher, and I am a culinary arts lecturer at the University of Pretoria. I'm in the Department of Consumer and Food Sciences, and I have the great honor today to work with a piece of Italian manufactured equipment called La Germania stove. And we're very honored to be associated with them. And I want to show you how to make a very simple, unfortunately not very Italian item called a Spanish tortilla. And a Spanish tortilla is basically a fairly big omelette made with eggs and potato. So there's lots of research around Spanish tortilla, and Spanish tortilla has got nothing to do with Mexican tortillas. A Spanish tortilla is, as I said, basically potato and egg, and research says that it might have come from the Middle Ages, where people from the land, peasant people, cooked vegetables and eggs and perhaps a little bit of ham in a skillet for a meal. But the current version appears to have come from the 18th century, from the reign of King Charles III. And as you know, potatoes was only introduced in Europe in the 16th century. So there's lots of stuff going around, and excuse my pronunciation, but tortilla de patatas, or in our case today, tortilla de patatas con cebolle, which is one with onions. So it's unclear if onions must be in the tortilla or not. This lovely book that I have brought along, called Culinaria of Spain, in fact makes theirs without onions. But the American website Serious Eats says that the onions are important because they also keep the tortilla nice and moist. And if you have recently traveled to Spain, you may have remembered that you find a tortilla in every little corner, every little restaurant, every little bar. And they usually sit there on the counter. And if you order a slice, somebody just slices a slice from there. Now and again, pop it in the microwave to warm it up a little bit, but that's not advisable. It's good to have it warm. It's good to have it lukewarm. It's good to have it at room temperature. I don't think it's great to cool it, but it's a wonderful meal for breakfast, for lunch, for supper. People make it to pop into a lunchbox for kids, but apparently Spanish people find a reason to have tortilla, and they just have it quite often. So apart from the question whether there should be onions in or not, the other part of it, apart from a lovely stove like our Germania stove today, is the vessel that you're going to cook this in. And many years ago, a friend of mine, many years ago, she was still a student, backpacked through Europe, and Helene worked in Spain. And when she came back, she was also infatuated with tortilla. And I kept on saying to her, Helene, but it's impossible because non-stick pans are a fairly new invention. So how did people make tortillas without a non-stick pan? I still don't have the answer. I, for many years after that, tried to make tortilla, and it was always a disaster. It always stuck at the bottom, got too dark, got burnt at the bottom. So if I may make a suggestion, do invest in a nice pan. I was fortunate enough to visit Spain for the first time last year, and I bought this, And what's nice about this pan is that it has fairly high sides, but it's also not entirely, it doesn't entirely flare out. So it's slightly curved in. And what the advantage of that is that once you turn this over, it's almost as if it makes a pie that has these rounded sides, which is really nice to contain it because one of the quality aspects of a tortilla is that it has a nice golden crust on the outside and a fairly thick piece of cooked egg around the side, but that the inside is fairly moist and perhaps even a little bit runny. So, viewers, if you don't like egg that is not completely cooked, by all means make it um, cooked right through. But perhaps you also want to try it a little bit more traditionally, where once you cut a slice out of it, you should be able to see a little bit of uncookedness in the center. So, apart from the pan, there's a little bit to be said about the oil, the potatoes, and of course the onions. But seasoning is simple. It's salt and pepper. There are some recipes that ask for a little bit of paprika. I've chosen today to add a little bit of smoked salt in there just to give it a little bit of a different dimension. But it's a simple dish and the tools are simple. Of course, one wants some sort of ladle or spoon or stirring equipment that you won't hurt your Teflon pan or your non-stick pan. And apart from that, you want a plate that fits the diameter of the pan because we're going to cook the tortilla on one side, then turn it over on the plate, and then slip it back into the pan to cook the other side. And once that, and that's probably the most difficult part of the tortilla. Once that is done, it cooks on the other side and then it's ready to serve. And there's few things as nice as tortilla with a little side salad. I think one could probably have a nice slice of bread with it, but you also don't want to overdo on the carbs. And if you want to make it a little bit more interesting, there can be ham in there as well. But there's many versions, and this lovely book has a number of Spanish egg dishes, and I'm not going to try and pronounce all of them, but they are all there. So back at our Spanish tortilla, I've got some potatoes peeled. Yeah, this is 2 for 5 potatoes, and I have 3 onions. One could probably make this from a very strict volume recipe, but I think it's nice to also use what you have in the house and the volume. So the onions, I'm going to fry in a little bit of oil. So on with our stove, sorry, and that can just warm up in the meantime. So I'm going to slice the onions and we're going to fry them in the little bit of oil. Then those are going to be drained and set aside. Most recipes use very good quality olive oil to make a Spanish tortilla. But this previously mentioned website that I spoke of called Serious Eat also says that one has to remember that a lot of the flavor nuances disappears from olive oil when it gets warmed up. So one could probably use something as simple as sunflower oil. I have a mixture of sunflower oil and olive oil, yeah, that I'm going to use today. And once we have the onions fried, we're going to, in the same pan, cook the potatoes. So the thing with the potatoes is that they should be completely cooked inside, but they should also perhaps be a little bit brown. Um, there's some famous chef that actually, in fact, makes his tortilla with chips. So one could probably also just go that route and make good old-fashioned chips and put your make your tortilla with chips. But the way that the potatoes are cut are also important, and we I will show you how to do that in a moment. So 3 onions might seem a little bit excessive, but as I said, it appears that the onions provide a lot of moisture apart from flavor to the tortilla. So I'm going to stick with the 3 that I have here today. So our oil is nice and warm. We're going to transfer that into there. I have not seen any recipes that adds garlic to the tortilla, but I'm sure one could also do that if you want to. But it's about the simplicity of it. Perhaps garlic's not something that you want to have for breakfast. So, that's probably why it's not in there. So these are going to cook slightly gently and slower than one wants. You want good caramelization. You want to ensure that the sugars really caramelize quite well. I don't have this on the biggest flame of the La Germania stove. So I have my onions on one of the 2 medium burners of the La Germania. This wonderful donated stove from La Germania has got 5 burners, a really big one that has also a little additional part that sits onto the stove so that one can even put a smaller pot on there, and then it has a large burner, the 2 medium burners and the small burner. So I have got the onions on one of the medium burners, but when I do the potatoes we might need a little bit more heat to warm up the oil, and we might move to the larger burner. This stove of La Germania is connected to electricity so that we have an automatic lighter or igniter, so that one doesn't have to hang around with matches and things like that. So our onions are coming on steadily. They are slowly caramelizing. The sugars are cooking out. We want them to really be deliciously soft and cooked. And as I say, then we're going to set them aside. So back at the potatoes, what I've read about the tortilla is that the potatoes should preferably be of the type, and I'm sorry, I'm now also giving away my ignorance. I don't know a lot about potato varieties in South Africa, and I shouldn't be saying that because I'm involved in all sorts of potato research. But what is important is that in the past, it was perhaps said that a certain variety of potato is good for a certain cooking method, and recent research has shown that that may not be true, that from the same varietal of potato, you can do mashed potato or chip frying or whatever. The important thing here today is that you ideally want potatoes that don't keep their shape. It's fine. One can make that type of tortilla. The problem with that is that you then get very separated layers in your tortilla with an egg custard in between, where if you have a potato that breaks up slightly, the inside stays a little bit more creamy, and it's almost as if some of the potatoes mash up in the egg, and you get a center that is a little bit more sort of creamy, I'd say. So I have to confess, I don't know what varietal of potatoes these are. They they were just around. They don't feel to me as if they're the freshest around, which is good for the purpose today. So I'm going to cut them in half, and then we are going to slice them. You don't want them overly thin, but there are recipes that do this stage on the mandolin, so you then get potatoes that are really quite thin. So I am going to cut them quite thin, but I'm just doing them by hand, and we will get a nice break up of the potato as they cook. So our onions, as you can see, is becoming a little bit caramelized. There's some of them that's browning a little bit, but we're not overly hasty at this time. We don't want to burn the onions. We don't want them to become bitter. We want them to really take their time and cook. You can see there's not so much fat in the pan. Some of the recipes that I've investigated says that even though we cook the potatoes in a lot of oil, because of the onions and potentially the flavor of the potatoes, that one can use that oil then afterwards for various things, of course make more tortillas, but that you could also perhaps use it to make a nice salad dressing or so. So I'm just continuing cutting the potatoes, cutting them fairly thin, because in our case we do want our potatoes to break up a little bit and amalgamate with the egg to create a nice soft textured filling. So I have 8 eggs here, but I think I'm only going to use 6 of them. I'm going to break them in the bowl there in a moment. And the reason for that is that I want to salt the eggs before I add anything to them. And the reason for that is that the salt also prevents the egg from drying out too much during the cooking, and it keeps the mixture a little bit moist. So as I said previously, I have a little bit of smoked salt here, as some of the recipes adds a little bit of paprika, smoked paprika to a tortilla, but I have the smoked salt here that's going to add layer. So I have a big bowl for the egg, and the reason is that I want to put the egg in there, put the salt in, break it up, but then I want to add the warmed potatoes to the egg. And the reason for that is that it slightly warms up the egg and perhaps even potentially cooks the egg a little bit. And that thickens the egg and ensures that it stays a little bit together when you have to turn this thing around. So as I say, I'm going to add that to the bowl in the back here, and then as we progress, we will add the warmed potatoes to that. So just in terms of the oil, again, as I say, this is sunflower oil, but you are welcome to use well, this is a mixture of sunflower oil and some olive oil, but you are welcome to only use olive oil if you want to. Good. I think we're almost ready. The onions are looking great. I think we're getting there. I'm going to transfer to the back flame there. I think we can bang up the heat a little bit. Get some good caramelization on the onions. So this dish in no way goes into the oven, but this particular La Germania that we have a huge big oven, has two fantastic racks, has a built-in or custom made oven tray or a baking tray, and the features are wonderful for this oven. So, but this tortilla doesn't go into the oven at all. It's all done on top of the stove. Good. So now we have a little bit more heat. The onions are now sort of reducing quite a little bit. They are becoming much less in volume. There's a lot of moisture evaporation. So we're good. So back to our eggs. I'm going to break these in here. So as I said, I have 6 eggs, which I think should be sufficient for this size tortilla, but I'm sure you can make it much bigger. The shop that I bought this in Barcelona, of course, had tortilla pans from this size to really quite big. I think it depends on how often you make tortillas and how often and for how many guests. This is just a really quite sort of average medium pan. It could really make quite a lot of portions. I think if you fill it right to the top, this could easily serve 16 people. If you're going to do it as a little starter, it may even be a little bit more. So now you can see on the bigger flame, our onions are really taking on quite a nice little bit of color. And that's exactly what we want. So I'm going to season the eggs, as I said. So some recipe says that one shouldn't be adding the salt in at this point because it thins out the egg at this point. But as I said, the other recipes again says that it prevents the egg from drying out. So it's just a matter of, you don't want to whisk this too much. It's just a matter of breaking up the egg. Good. And that's what it looks like. So we're going to add the onions in there as soon as they come out of the heat. And then we're going to also add the warmed potato in there. If you add that in there, of course, it's necessary to stir that quite vigorously because you don't want the egg to cook or curdle. But as it's quite a lot of egg and they aren't, they sort of coolish. It's a cool day today, so they outside, but they should be able to take a little bit of the heat. Good. I think that's fine. I like the color of that. There's nice browning. One can smell this. So, of course, the back burner gives us nice heat. Good. I'm going to dump that into our egg, give it a good stir. And then we want to add our oil to that. So that in total is almost a liter of oil, and of which I've used a little bit for the onions. That's about 800 mils. That looks fine. Of course, you want to be careful that this doesn't bubble over. So we want that quite nice and warm. We're going to just use a small piece of potato. I've not pre-cut the potatoes because otherwise they'll oxidize, and then I have to put them in water, and then I have to dry them again, and then they're going to spatter when I cook them. So I've cut them just now so that they potentially are as dry as possible, but they might have made a little bit of moisture now that they've stood. So if you want to, you can just at this point dry them a little bit to ensure that there's not too much spatter there, but just add them in slowly when you do that. So apart from the seasoning, the salt seasoning that goes into the egg, there's also a little bit of pepper. I don't know, at university, we sometimes buy whole peppercorns, and then other times we buy ground black pepper. The problem with the commercially ground black pepper is that it's very finely ground and it almost blackens the mixture. So I'm not too keen on that. I think at home I just use a pepper grinder, but this is peppercorns that I've ground in a spice mill. So it's somewhere between sort of coarse and fine. And for me, that works best. So I'm going to season that. I don't know. There's also recipes that don't add any pepper at all. So the only seasoning is the salt. And as I said, some recipes that do a little bit of paprika. So I have a presentation plate here that I'm going to use later. I'll rinse it and use it. But apart from that, as I said, I need a plate that's slightly smaller than the presentation plate, but a plate that is the size of the pan. And the reason for that is that once this is now cooked in the egg mixture in this pan, we're going to have to cook the underside and the top side, but we need to flip this over. I've never seen any other person do a hand flip. I think the big problem with that is if you were to flip the pan, it will turn very beautifully, but when it flops down, because the top part is quite soft, it might just spatter all over the show. So I think the best and the easiest is to do it on the plate. It's a little bit messy. It's probably the only difficult part in making the tortilla, but don't be afraid, just do it. So as I say, once this mixture is cooked on the one side, we're going to turn it around and we slip it back into the pan. But for that, you need a plate. So this plate does not have a high edge. You probably obviously want to have something that is as flat as possible, because then it turns out best and it doesn't fall in the center, but it also is easier to slip back. So there you can see the oil is already warming up nice and strong. So I'm going to slowly add them. One can do this in batches. Some of the recipes, of course, say that you could do them individually. Now nice and brown, they almost slightly puffed up. So I'm going to just throw them into the egg mixture immediately out of here. As I said, I don't think it's at this point necessary to drain them on paper, but if you're nervous about the amount of oil, of course, you should feel welcome to do that. But they have almost become crisp on the outside. They almost chip-like, but the eggs, of course, going to soften them again. So that was just the first batch. I'm now going to do the second batch as well. I just want to stir that in, and as I say, the heat of the potatoes will potentially thicken the egg a little bit, which will later ensure that you have quite a nice gooey inside. So I'm going to just add the rest of the potatoes into here. And those will continue to cook in exactly the same way as these. And then we are ready. I'm not entirely sure if this is a recipe that one can make in stages. I've never had to think about that, but I'm almost sure that if you have a dinner party, that you could do this part beforehand. My mind says to me that it should be okay to let this mixture stand, and then you can just slip it into the pan. I don't think one should do this hours ahead of time. There could probably be a food safety issue with the warm potatoes in the egg, but if you do this a little bit ahead of time, I'm sure that should be fine. But as you see, that looks quite nice. I suspect that I have a little bit too little salt in here for the volume of potatoes. I'm going to add another pinch of salt, and then we're ready. So our mixture is now completely done. As you can see, it has thickened up quite nicely because of the heat of the potatoes into the egg. I'm off the big burner on our La Germania stove, and I'm going to go back onto one of the medium ones. And I think just because you want to ensure that this doesn't brown too quickly, and because this is not a big tortilla pan, you also don't need the really big burner. Of course, if you had a bigger pan, just because of the diameter of the actual burner or the radius, you might want to stay on the bigger burner and just turn it down quite a bit. I'm sort of on medium heat, yeah, now. I drained the oil from the same pan that I had fried the onions and the potatoes in. One could wipe this out with a little bit of kitchen paper, but there's ever the little bit of oil that's remaining in there. I'm not going to be worried about that. I want to warm up the pan slightly. You don't want to put egg into a cold pan. Even though this is a non-stick pan, there's always the possibility that the egg might stick to the pan. So we're going to just warm it up slightly. Doesn't have to be hot. You want to be careful at this stage of browning this too quickly. So the ultimate aim of the tortilla is that it has a really nice crust on both the top and the bottom in even colors, but that there's this portion of the inside that is only slightly cooked. And that takes a little bit of experience. So I'm going to put my entire mixture in now. And you can hear it sizzles slightly. And that's good. And then I'm going to just ensure that this doesn't have parts that don't have potatoes and parts that might have too much. I'm not going to press it down or anything. I want to just make sure that it's slightly even. Good. So I want to ensure that it creates a nice crust all round, but I want to make sure that it doesn't brown too fast and become too brown too quickly, but I do want a nice crust. So what I'm doing at the moment is I'm just making sure that around the sides, yeah, there's now no sort of funny bits and parts that's poking out. Because remember, I want to turn this thing around now, and if there's bits that's not so pretty, my final tortilla might not be visually appealing. So it's just a matter of sort of evening it out, and I'm just making sure that it's loose. I don't want to shake it too vigorously that it rips apart, because remember that this entire thing now is held together by the 6 eggs. The protein that's slowly coagulating and keeping the potato and the onions together in a mass. So by moving it, I can just see that it is loose, so that I don't also have to scratch around with my wooden tool around the sides too much. So I'm going to leave that. This is not covered at this point. If you cover it, it will cook much faster, and then it won't be possible to get that sort of gooey, almost slightly underdone egg center, which is what we're aiming for today. So we'll be patient. We're going to cook it, and then once it's ready, we're going to slip it out onto our plate that fits the pan there, and slip it back. But for the time being now, it's just slowly coming together. I'm watching it carefully so that I know that it is also nicely in the middle of the burner. I want to make sure that the heat is not more on one side than the other side, because I want, of course, nice browning. But it is important at this point that there's a little bit of cohesion in the binding of the egg to the potatoes all round, because going to be fragile to turn this out, and I want to know that it is as strong as possible without all the protein in the middle having coagulated and therefore have given it strength. If you think about um, just a very dry omelette. It 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 would feel almost stronger than a slightly underdone omelette, and that's just because of the protein that's fully coagulated. So gentle now. We might give it a little bit of heat towards the end to make sure that it has a nice brown color. But for the time being, I'm really on sort of medium um, medium low, and I don't want to rush it too much. So we'll just watch it carefully. So I think our tortilla is now ready to be turned around, and I've turned our La Germania gas stove flame up a little bit higher just to ensure that there is a little bit of browning, because I didn't create that browning all that much in the beginning. But as you can see, this is actually quite undercooked still in the middle, and that's what we're after. So you want to make sure that you don't burn yourself at this point. So perhaps have long sleeves that you can cover your arms at this point, because you're going to now put this plate on there, turn this around, and then gently slip it back. I still have my flat wooden spoon, yeah, in case I struggle a little bit. But you can see it's actually, in fact, completely loose. And it should essentially be possible to toss it, but as I say, I've never seen anyone do that. So we're going to turn this around now. So I'm going to put my plate on there. I'm going to take the pan in my hand. I'm going to take it off the gas, and I'm going to simply flip it over, and then it should look like that. And then we want to gently slip that back into there. And there will always be a little bit of that left over. And then I can see that that's already slightly cooked. So I'm going to just go back on a little bit of lower heat. And we want to just set the bottom now. We don't want to overcook that. So that's going to be on there for another minute or so, and then we're ready to serve it. My wooden board is ready. I have a few cocktail tomatoes. I'm not going to put it on the plate that I thought. I'm going to put it back on the wooden board, and I have a few torn basil leaves to serve that with. I think our tortilla looks fantastic. I don't want to cook it any further, otherwise we might lose a little bit of that inside. Our trusted La Germania has been a complete pleasure in this making of a Spanish tortilla, and as you can see, it looks quite delicious. So I'm going to slip it out onto our board. We are going to slice it. We can serve a little bit of tomatoes with it, a little bit of basil, and that's it. As I say, if you travel in Spain, you'll see this on the shelves of bars, of little eateries, and people have this quite often. They walk in, they ask for a plate, the shop owner simply cuts a piece and serves it right there. I think they probably, and I'm just talking of what I think, they probably make it as it's finished so that it's always fairly fresh. But try and make this. Go out, investigate La Germania, and use the stove to enjoy a delicious little dish. So there you can see is a little bit of the sort of slightly uncookedness. Perhaps I was a little bit overly careful. I think it may have been a little bit more uncooked in the middle, but I have a cameraman who is not very partial to uncooked egg, so I also purposefully cooked it a little bit more. But that's your personal preference. It can be served with anything, a really nice salad. I'm going to take a close up of the inside here because there is actually quite a little bit of oozing of egg there. If you don't like the smell and the taste of such darkened egg, you could also make this a little bit less cooked. But yeah, enjoy this and tune in another time for another little video using this fantastic stove from La Germania. Thank you.